Hi, I'm Sydney, and welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm excited to share with you another story. So, this is Startup Horror Stories. All right, so over my past decade of being in startup and investment, I have accumulated so many stories. Not all of them are mine, thank God, because they are horror stories, so they can't all be mine. But I sometimes share these stories during like job interviews or just in conversation or things like that. But these are things that have really stuck with me because of the intensity of things that go on when it comes to being a founder and when it comes to being in that roller coaster of startup and invest. As a journey itself, it's like nothing else. Well, maybe parenthood. Maybe. So the first one is actually one of the first startups I've ever worked with. And so he is out in Vancouver. I will leave his name out, but he is an incredible founder. I got the privilege of having a spring activator as my pilot project when I was a founder for them to use my tool in order to see, how their startups are doing. So I met with one of the founders and he told me this insane thing that has happened to him. Maybe it's a horror story, maybe it's not. It's really up to you to tell me and to figure it out for yourself. So he was closing investment at the time, and he was so busy, he was so stressed, there were so many things going on, and he was a first-time founder, and he did not want to disappoint his investors because he knows how hard they are to come by. So the night that he actually signed for the investment with his investors online, he was on the computer, he was up all night waiting for the papers to come in. And when he signed, it was the same night when his first daughter was being born in the hospital. So he had his computer with him in the hospital the whole time. And I could never forget this story. I could never forget that look on his face when he told me. And I was like, did they ever know? And he's like, no, I don't know if I was ever supposed to tell them. And maybe they know now, I don't know. But I just thought that it was such an incredible story about passion, about sacrifice, and he was at the hospital. So let's don't pretend that he wasn't. So he was at the hospital, but just what a founder goes through is always something that is so admirable and so grounding to me. So I always think back on the story when people want to help founders and to be able to give them real help, because at the end of the day, it's like we are all human. We are all human. You have the same things going on. You have, your life ambitions. You have families. You have all of these things, and you also, in addition to that, have a startup. So that is the first kind of horror story that I can think of. The other ones. So when I was at this clean tech venture studio, I was operating it, and it was a story that I was watching. So I was kind of like in the audience of a movie. I don't know, and it was just, there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of intensity, there was a lot of things that were going on. They only had one investment. There was only one startup, and so this startup had to give up 50% of their equity to the venture studio in order to get $250,000 investment, I believe. And so they did. And the startup was based out of a school. And so what the horror story is that it was kind of, I think it was just a horror story maybe just for me, in my mind, in my head. I don't know. I was the only one that came from venture and startup, and I didn't know that was going to be the case for that step in my career. I really wanted to learn. I really wanted to grow. I wanted somebody to actually be able to teach me things about startup and venture. I didn't want to be the only one who's ever come from that industry. I didn't want to be the only one who ever had any startup experience. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up having to teach and tutor like 5 hours a day to other people who were running the venture studio, people who were in higher positions and well compensated, much more than anybody else. And it was a situation that had to be hidden from the startups. And that, I think, was the biggest part of the horror story, was that all of the, amateur level, entry level experience was all an illusion that was hidden from the startups, because they believed that when they gave up 50% of their startup, they were actually going into a venture studio that was filled with experts, that were filled with people with experience in sales, in marketing, in go-to-market strategy, in competitive research, in secondary market research, and all of these other things. And they weren't. They were given people that were new to the startup industry, and they were given one very stressed out individual who came from the startup industry to operate and to also not make any decisions. So it was a very kind of tense and odd kind of situation. I think that when you're building this, company and you're helping startups, then you should be confident in your unique skill sets on what you can bring to the table. And your biggest skill set can't be just delegating to people with experience and other interns. It has to be actual skills and actual experiences and actual tangible results. And that is the only way that it can be fair to a startup that had to give up 50% equity. So whenever I see, kind of huge chunks of equity being given as an investor, this is always going to be something that is going to need a little bit more digging into. So I've seen other funds like this here in Canada, a couple in the US, that give up 50% or even 75%, and then they have to go through this, set of milestones that the investors have created, with or without knowing a lot about their industry first. And then if they have achieved that within a year or 6 months or something like that, then they will get back 25%, and they will still stay at like 50% of equity. And this is at pre-seed or seed. This is kind of more what I'm saying, is that when you're at such an early stage and you've given up so much, it's hard for you to raise in the future. In fact, you may never raise in the future. It's also difficult for those kinds of very not founder-friendly, very aggressive funds like that venture studio and like these other funds that I'm, referring to raise from a limited partner capital, because there are a lot that are, wondering why you are using this kind of structure, and it's a little bit out of the norm. But if you're a first-time founder, maybe you think it is the norm. Maybe you just don't know the difference. Just like these startups, they didn't know the difference, and it's not their fault. They didn't get to decide anything except who to sign with. That's the only thing that they've decided. And because of that, they can never sign on with anybody else. And that is a tragedy, and that is a horror story. I think that there are so many brilliant minds, engineers, scientists, inventors that are out there. And because they were lured in by certain kinds of elements, they may have signed into a contract that they can't really get out of. And they sign into a contract that will never allow them to use their invention, technology, product in any other way other than what this fund or investor or venture studio wants you to do, whether or not they have the capability to even bring you to market in the first place. So that is really tricky. These are all really tricky situations. At the family office that I used to work at, we had this one investment that I really wanted. I really believed in these founders. And they had an advisor for 7%. So 7% of your cap table was already too high for a pre-seed investment. And we were going to say no. Eventually, there was some wiggle room. There was some negotiations. That investor ended up actually writing a check for that percentage on top of his advisory shares. And really, it was balanced, it was evened out, and it was great. So then we were able to actually invest in them. So if you imagine that 7% was too high, it was raising red flags, then how many flags and what color are these flags if you already gave up 50% to a fund or to an investment individual or to whoever, and they don't have any tangible industry experience. They don't have any contacts. They don't have any way to help you, and they have no startup experience. So what does that really tell the other investors? It tells them that you kind of got stooped, and they don't know how to help you get out of it. A messy cap table is something that you can't really come back from because you've already given it away. And so the ability for you to be able to get more funding is only from that one investor. And being tied to an investor that doesn't have any support to provide you because there's no expertise and skill sets and startup experience, that is really, really tough. And I feel that a lot when I'm thinking about how startups are running and what they are choosing to sign up for and everything in between, because sometimes what you need is different than what is offered. So that's my second horror story. My third one, of course, is one that I have shared briefly before, which is about my own startup failure. So this is horrible because I hired an interim CTO when I was a founder, and in 2 weeks, he was able to read the NDA agreement. And then also, in 2 weeks, he was able to take our MVP and destroy it, completely destroy it, and put us in 1 year of technical debt that took 5 engineers to get out of. It was so much. It was more than I could bear. And I just didn't know what to do except wanting to cry. There were so many moments that I wanted to cry. So that was my third one. My fourth one was one that I did cry. That's when MongoDB, the database, got breached. And they get breached all the time, it seems. So they also had a huge hospital breach or something across Europe, a year or two before it happened to us. And we were breached. All of our users were compromised. Our everything was wiped, actually. So we couldn't even prove, even if we wanted to get investment at the time, we couldn't even prove we've ever had any users with any data of any sort, because we were hacked, because MongoDB's security was not very good. They are what you paid for. We picked the cheapest one we could find because it was the cheapest one that we could afford. And we were just starting out, but literally all of our work was recorded onto those databases, and they were all completely gone within the next morning. And I remember picking up the phone and talking to my lead developer and just crying, being like, Guillermo, what happened? I don't understand. And he did everything that he could and finally was like, yeah, no, this other thing came out, and showed me the thing from MongoDB that came out that morning, and we were one of them. And it was horrible. Also, just so you know, they do not give you your money back for your monthly subscription just because they completely failed. If you were wondering, oh, I'm sure you got your money back. No, you don't get that. You don't get an apology. You don't get your money back. You have a public statement to warn the masses of their customers how many people were breached. I still remember that at Collision, no, it was not that year. It was a year later. That next year, the CTO was on stage at Collision and said, well, the most hurtful things is when people tweet about us negatively and write negative things on social media about how they feel. I'm like, that's the worst thing. That is the worst thing, really. I can't see how that's worse than losing all of your customers' records immediately. But to each their own. To each their own. We all have different views on what is the worst, I guess. So that's the next horror story. Yeah. So there was one where, so you won't be able to find this anywhere on my LinkedIn or anything. It just says consulting. I consulted for this startup it's very dangerous. I've seen this a few different times when consultants who are good at tech want to build the tech to replace their jobs, their own specific consulting jobs. So I've seen this a few times, and this was a horror story of mine. So I was doing consulting marketing for this startup, and they were building this technology, this AI that was supposed to replace, a very specific kind of service. So the founder, he knew that I came from, a fundraising background, an investment background. I come from an MBA and everything. He never asked me to help him on this part. I helped him with marketing. This part, the fundraising part, the pitch deck part, all of this stuff was done before I joined the team. So he already had this package made. He already had everything made. I never saw it. And then when I did see it, when he was like, okay, well, this accounting firm that's really highly recognized, they put together this study for me. And I was like, what is the criteria for the study? And that's the dangerous part. That was the dangerous part. So a first-time founder gave inputs for what the study should be. So the study is going to be small to medium-sized businesses in this country, and they have this many employees. Okay, so how many of them are there? So then, of course, the target market is going to look enormous. But this is not a viable or feasible market. You can't just drive over there and provide this setup, this tool, this everything for these small companies, because they might not be able to afford it. They may have such a small team that they're not going to need it, or they're not going to need it for very long. And also, in terms of the feasibility of the go-to-market strategy, it just wasn't feasible. So you're not going to be selling this kind of software to mom and pop shops that are 4 people. How is that really going to work, And they may or may not even have the problem or need for this. But that just wasn't the criteria that was given to this accounting and consulting firm. So the criteria that was given to them was of this massive market, not the actual serviceable market at all. And so that was kind of a big issue. And then the serviceable market would look very, very small and not investable. And so because this founder, who I would consider this person a friend who has happy ears. You ever meet founders like that? They have happy ears. So it means that they're hearing all the positive things, and then only the positive things. So it looks like your market is so big, which is great, but that's not your serviceable market. That's not your real market at all. And it also looks like, every investment and everything that we apply for, we're just going to get. So that actually was the go-to-market strategy as well. A big part of it was that, okay, well, after we do this, we're going to get this investment. And then we're going to get this investment. And we're going to get this investment. And he has exactly who he's going to get it from, but he does not know the level of competition to get each one. Because he was a first-time founder, and he didn't do this kind of research. So I was like, okay, you are sure that you're going to get this kind of investment? How do you know? He goes, oh, we have it in. We already know people. We have lots of referrals. So he didn't get the investments, and it was such a horror story because he put his house on second mortgage. He, refinanced so many things. He has so much going on and paying for a WeWork space that was really expensive, but also just not necessary for the size of our team, really. And everyone was scared all the time about what their future and their jobs looked like because the finances were just not really matching up to what the expectations were based on, how he was explaining it before and what was going on. So he was really financing everything because the investments were not coming through. As the market wasn't viable, the product wasn't ready, and it became a half service consulting and half sort of product, sort of MVP kind of situation in a market that really wasn't growing to an investable kind of standard. And the investment strategy itself, it just didn't really make sense because his expectation was 100% of the investments that we apply for, we will get. And I'm like, how will you get them? And again, this was already decided upon before I joined the team. And when I joined, it felt like, I was doing the marketing. So what I was really doing was putting on different events, drawing an audience, creating buzz, creating brand awareness, and all of these things. So that's actually what I was supposed to be doing. But what ended up kind of happening with this startup and this story was very dramatic. So every week there was a layoff. There was a layoff. Of course there was. There had to be. Every day I was worried about this person as a human because he was a really good person, and I still hold him dear to my heart today. He's one of my favorite clients, and it just, is great support in everything that I do. So, of course, you can't have anything in your heart but love for this person, and love for and hope for what they're doing, and hope that they are getting it right. But in a way, I felt so guilty that I was hired to do this marketing, and I really wanted to do it. But I had to help him with this other part that he didn't know how to do, but he didn't know that he didn't know how to do. And that part isn't his fault. Not having, ears that hear everything and only the happy things, that part is his fault. It really is his fault. It's no one else's fault. So we shifted strategies, but he still is kind of going after investment over and over again in this kind of hamster wheel phase, and I still worry about him today. I do. I still worry about him a lot, because I think that having been a founder, you know what it feels like to have that feeling of you should let go, but you don't want to, and in a way you can't. And if you let some things go, or you let go of your ideals, or you let go of your vision, then maybe you're going to stop breathing. Or maybe not. So I empathize with where he's at, and it was just such a horror story to see, as an MBA graduate, the numbers really not match up to where things are, and it's really your job on the line, it's all your friends' jobs on the line, and seeing it in those kinds of very clear walls, the see-through transparent glass walls of WeWork, you are really in it. You're really in it. And that is horrifying to me. It's horrifying to just so many parts of it. So many parts of it. So that is another horror story that I have. And then finally, I have this other one where, this luckily isn't about me. It's about a friend of mine or a colleague of mine in Quebec, and he is interesting. He's quite a character. If you live in Quebec, you probably already have seen him quite a bit. So he invited me to come over to his co-working space. This was when I first started as a founder. It was like 2016. So I came over, I brought my little laptop, and I was like, hey, which one is your office? He goes, oh, this one. And he pointed to a space with 8 desktops and 8 chairs and so much stuff. There's so much stuff. And I was like, where is everyone? Where do you want me to sit? I don't know where everyone else is. And he's like, oh, there's no one else. It's just us. I was like, okay, this is all your stuff. How do you have 8 computers? You're just one person. And he's like, yeah. So what is scary about this story is that this is a founder who is really good at getting grant money. He's really good at getting grant money. He's not so great about being an entrepreneur or founding a company, though. But he's really good at getting grant money. So I looked at this room full of new technology, okay? So there were desktops, there was that little, what's it called? That MacBook Mini made of gold for $1,600. Several MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros, printers, and this was scattered throughout this really expensive co-working space in downtown Montreal. So I was like, what? I don't understand what happened. And he's like, well, I got funding to get all of this equipment, but my funding that I deserve and I didn't get for all of the people that I am hiring, it didn't come through, so I had to fire all of them. I was like, there was another way. You could have done that to keep them, could have built a business. It's viable. Made sales. These are other ways. So he didn't do that. But he did think it was the Canadian government's fault for not giving him money for hiring other people. And he called it my money too. So that was another scary thing too. So I was looking at all of these desktops, all of this hardware, all of Canada's tax-paying money going into startup grants for founders like that. And it was terrifying to me. So, so he had all of this stuff for just one person. He cannot return it, by the way. I know if you're thinking, oh, can he return it and then use the money to hire? No, because the way that these grants work is that some of it is for equipment, some of it is for people, some of it is for R&D, some of it is for, so it's all actually in different kind of categories in the way that he applied, and he showed me how. And he also, this is a very funny founder. And yeah, so I watched him like lug all of this stuff across the street to his apartment and like stick it in, I don't know, any closet because he has no use for it. Doesn't really know what to do with it. I feel like a real entrepreneur would have actually just sold it and then used it to hire people or do something. But anyway, that's not what he did. So he just stashed things everywhere, and then he was like, well, now I have all of this stuff. I have no people. I guess I'll just keep applying for more grants and see what happens. And so he's been telling his staff, who he just had to let go, to be on hold until like the next round of funding. And he isn't paying them. They're not coming in. I've never seen them before. I've only been to this co-working space like 2 times. And it was awkward both times. There was just so much equipment. There was so much equipment. Like there was really nowhere to sit. And so I was like, okay, so if you have no people, why are you still in this co-working space? It's really expensive. Isn't it like twice as much as like your rent or something? Isn't that what you said before? He goes, yeah, no, it is. But since like I got a good deal by like paying up front, I already paid for like the whole year. And I was like, oh my God. So that was also another different grant, I believe, that he used to pay for the co-working space for the whole year. The cherry on top in this horror story is that this founder, he really knew how to work this system, which, by the way, like those 2 days, I was like pulling my hair out because I could not believe that that's where grant money was going to. He was over a certain age, and he didn't fit a certain kind of demographic that was really targeted for minorities or for young people or for people who were disadvantaged as founders, right? So there are a lot of more equality-based, diversity-focused grants and subsidies and those kinds of things that are also provided by the federal or provincial or even municipal governments all across different countries, really. But it's for the startup and investment ecosystem because less than 3% of founders are women. Young founders have a very difficult time because they did not have, all of this work experience, career savings to go off of and everything. So they don't really have much to fall back on. So this guy, being a Caucasian male over 40, sees that he does not qualify for a diversity grant in literally every single way, calls up the agency to tell them that they are discriminating against him and that he deserves a shot at this grant because he is out of money. And so, as he's telling me this, I was laughing so hard, I started crying. Because who does that? Who calls up a diversity grant to yell at them? So, yeah, this guy. So he calls up this diversity grant to yell at them, and he said, so finally they allowed me to apply, so maybe I can get some of my staff back. And I'm like, why do you go through all of this effort? Like, you're not going to get it, right? And he's like, well, I still deserve a shot. And yeah, he's never stopped believing that. So those are my horror stories. I hope that you enjoy them. And if you have any of yours that you would like to share, or any of yours that you've witnessed or experienced yourself, or whichever the case is, please feel free to share them with me in the comments below. Thanks!